So I explained to you a little bit about my reading of the section in the book about Mary. And I wanted to ask you a few questions about it and what you thought. So the first question is, what do you think it was like for Mary to have a son who was God? What do you think it would have been like to be sinless like her?
Well, the first thing I think of when you ask me that question is the story when they went to, do you remember when they went to the temple?
Yeah,
And
she couldn't find Jesus.
He was only, what, like 12? And
Yeah.
She already had to realize that he wasn't even thinking on the same plane that she was. And
Or even as like other kids.
Right. And even as a mom, it sounds kind of terrible, but you kind of rely on the fact that you know more than your kid.
I know.
Not in like a mean way, but you kind of have to trust that, you know, you're doing your best with what you know from the Lord and what you know from the people giving you counsel. And then you kind of have to trust that you know what you're doing. And it seems like she probably felt a lot of the time like, I have no idea what I'm doing, because he wasn't like a normal child.
Yeah.
And for her, even if she wasn't sinful, that doesn't mean that she didn't have those emotions of feeling inadequate or kind of out of her depth, because people who have completely typical children who are not God feel that way all the time.
Right.
So if you had God as your child, that would be pretty.
That'd be crazy.
I can imagine it would be a lot of difficult emotions for her.
Yeah.
And knowing what to do would be hard.
How, like, in particular, do you think, like, it would be like to be sinless like her? Like, how would it affect, like, your daily life?
That's a really hard question to answer, because I am pretty open with you guys that I feel that I'm sinful all the time almost. I mean, it's like constant. It's a constant battle. So, and constantly relying on God's forgiveness. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to be alive and not constantly relying on his forgiveness and knowing him without having that broken piece. Do you know what I mean? So if I really were not sinful at all, so if she really, I can only imagine that she would have known God in a deeper way than we do, because
That's
no
true.
matter how deep his forgiveness is, there's still that barrier.
Yeah, like our sin like still separates us from him.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I can do the second question.
Okay.
Have you had the experience of having a child? Okay, yes. And remind you of God in any way? Share this experience.
Did the experience of having a child remind me of God in any way?
Yeah.
Thinking about that question, I think that I jump to how God deals with us and how constantly, as a parent, you kind of are reminded of how he deals with us, because it's so difficult to be patient and wise and to parent well, quite frankly. Well, at least it is for me.
Yeah.
That it's an amazing reminder that he is that kind of parent for us. So no matter how challenging parenting might feel sometimes, or how much, especially when you guys were really little,
Yeah.
and the physical demands are really high and you just are exhausted and you're out of patience and you don't know how to do it any longer, to remember that he continues loving us unconditionally and keeps forgiving us and remains patient with us and is faithful, and his word says he never leaves us or forsakes us. And it's encouraging to draw strength from that and know that you can keep going as a parent too.
It's a good answer.
You weren't that bad.
Yeah. How can your child or someone younger than you help lead you to God? Share a time when your child or someone younger than you taught you something you never forgot.
I have a hard time trusting God sometimes because I really like to control situations and be
I'm kidding.
and have a handle on everything. No, it is true.
Yeah.
And I think a lesson that both of you guys taught me, especially when you were small, was the way that you trusted us and to some extent still do. Even though our relationships changed a lot, I think deep down you know that we have your best interests at heart, and you know you can believe that we're going to do what we say we're going to do and that we love you. And watching a child trust you that way really taught me a lot when you guys were little about trusting God, and that I needed to look to him the same way, and not knowing all the answers, not knowing the outcomes, but knowing that he has it.
Yeah.
You're underwhelmed.
I think it was a good answer. I don't know.
You'll understand someday.
Besides him being killed unjustly, what challenges do you think Mary might have experienced as the mother to the most special child in history? I feel like you kind of talked about it a little bit, but maybe just go in a bit more depth.
Yeah, I think it would have been hard to watch him live his whole life. I mean, think of the life he had. And I know I'm putting a frame of modern time on it, but really I wonder if looking at him, they were like, oh, that's what we imagined for our child, for him to not have a home, to be, he had a trade, he was skilled, but once he was 30, kind of hit the road and just had this completely different experience. And everywhere he went, people loved him, they hated him. It's hard to watch your kid go through anything hard. And so even long before he actually was crucified, it must have been an emotional roller coaster to watch him interact with these people and to marvel at his power, but also know him as your child, and to watch people try to he had enemies.
Yeah, he did, and he didn't even do anything to deserve it, so it might be hard for as his mother to understand.
He also never retaliated.
True.
In these situations. And as a parent, when somebody, you can even remember, probably to the point where it maybe wasn't even healthy, there's times when someone's mean to your kid and you're like, it's okay, hit him back, Ellie. And right or wrong, you really feel that deep sense of wanting justice for your child and wanting them to stand up for themselves, and to watch him again, just be on this higher plane of thinking. He knew his Father's plan for him. He was unswerving from it. He didn't stray from it. He may have wanted it to pass from him at the end, but even then he went through with it.
Yeah.
And to watch all that as a parent, I think would have been near impossible.
And I know it wasn't really a choice, but to know that he could have prevented his death, I think that would be really hard as a mother.
That's a really good point. She would have known the law, and she would have known Jewish history, and she would have known all that in her head. But as a mom, I can imagine that she must have wanted to be like, do you really have to do this? Are you sure?
Especially
there has to be another way.
And in the end, he could have avoided it with, I guess, I forget, Pontius Pilate, he wasn't completely against Jesus. He could have, went against it, because he didn't have, there was no proof.
Right, and Pilate was like, are you guys sure you want to do this?
Yeah.
This guy doesn't even seem that bad, right?
It was his ultimate decision, it wasn't the people, and he just asked them, because he, didn't know what to do. But,
no, that's a super point, knowing the whole time, you don't actually have to do this. He did.
Yeah, he did.
But she knew that he had the power
right.
not to. Of course, understanding who he was, it was his nature to be perfect and to be obedient to the Father. But it would have been hard to understand that and accept it as his mother for sure.
Yeah. Especially because, like, you raised him, like...
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so theological question. What does it tell us about God that he chooses a very simple, young, poor Jewish woman from Nazareth to give birth to his son?
That's a really cool theme throughout a lot of scripture, though, and in a lot of the parables that Jesus tells, right? I mean, in so many of them, who ends up having the place of honor?
Yeah, it's not
right?
like who
It's not who you'd expect
expect
in the world's eyes.
Yeah, like even in like the Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
How
Yeah.
like in the end, like all of the richer or like people who were like more respected, like all like passed by him and like didn't help him. But then, who was it? It was like a guy.
Who was the Samaritan?
Oh, it was the Samaritan.
Who he would have hated.
Who, yeah,
They would have been
were
enemies.
enemies.
Right.
When he was the one who helped him. So I think it's like a theme, like you were saying, throughout
It
a lot
is.
of scripture.
And yeah, who's at the banquet in the end when like
True.
in that parable?
And like who's he invite to his house? Like
exactly. Who's he eating with?
Yeah.
And he, you know, in Isaiah it talks about he's coming for the despised, the rejected. He was despised and rejected. And to come this way through Mary, through someone that no one would have expected, especially at that time, a woman with humble background, and it seems like, yeah, of course that's the way he was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's who he was. He didn't come to follow the world's rules.
What like specifically does it tell us about him? Like what are like a few characteristics? Like I think maybe it would be, I don't know like a word for this, but just like not caring about like obviously he's not worldly, but like not caring about like what the world like would expect.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it's different.
The values of the world are rooted in they're rooted in the roots of our sin, which is love of self and fear and pride. And if you can strip those things away and think of, well, what would you be motivated by? What would you be like if those things were stripped away? If you didn't have those corrupting factors and you have what he is, I mean, he can love perfectly because he doesn't have those corrupting factors. He can be perfectly faithful. He can be perfectly truthful and trustworthy. He can be always who he says he is. There's no duplicity. There's no deception. And for him to come through Mary, I think shows like he's going to do things totally backwards from what people expect.
Yeah.
And they were waiting for someone to like rescue them from the Romans.
And they were like expecting it to be a king, like somebody
right
who's gonna like raise himself up, like everybody, like no one would doubt that he was like the king. But then it's like Jesus coming in a manger with like poorest family,
smelly people visiting him and like animals and
but,
so I mean, but think of how freeing that is if you're poor, if you're, you know, if you've committed sins that the world looks at as like you could never be forgiven, you know, it's a healing that nothing on earth can provide, and it's a promise that nothing on earth offers. And I don't think that coming in the way they expected, he could have been true to that mission.
Okay, last question. When in your own life have you felt inspired to echo Mary's words to God, may it be done according to your word? If you don't like know what that is, it was when like the angel Gabriel, like in the Annunciation, came to Mary and asked and like told her basically that she was like carrying the Son of God, and then she just like,
like
welcomed
what?
it with open arms. Like she didn't even like question it, or like she was just open to it. And so she said that.
What did she said? She asked like one question, right? How can it be that this is so, or something like
I'm
that,
a
right?
virgin or something.
Oh, right. Like basically, how is this technically possible?
Yeah.
But then that's her only question.
Besides
it's
that,
not
she's
like,
just like all
I can't do it. She's not freaking out.
No, she was ready.
I think because he'd made her ready, and there's a huge comfort in that. And I think I felt those words. Anytime something happens that you don't know how you're gonna get through it.
Yeah, like it's like uncertain, like
anything that's uncertain. I remember many times like that in parenting, or before you're born, like with both of you, you find out there's different issues, and you know, some of them resolved, some of them didn't, and meant journeys here on the other side of the womb where you need, you know, medical stuff and all that. And like, but when you first hear something like she did, obviously it couldn't have been anything that monumental as what she was told.
Right.
But anything that seems just beyond what you can handle, there's a huge comfort in her example of saying, whatever you will, okay. I know that it's going to be okay somehow. I mean, at least by your standards, which should be higher than my standards anyway.
Right.
So there's huge relief in that. She's basically saying, I trust you. I know you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. You have to do it because I can't do it.
Yeah.
And that is a feeling I had a lot as a parent.
Yeah.
Is that the last question?
That's the end of the interview, yeah.
Cool.